You have $4.3 million sitting across 7 accounts and 3 asset classes, and the woman behind you in the checkout line just asked if you needed to put something back. You are holding a box of store-brand cereal and a carton of eggs. Your jacket has a small tear along the left cuff that you keep meaning to fix. You tell her no, you're fine, and you mean it in a way she can't possibly understand. She nods and looks slightly embarrassed for asking. You don't correct the assumption behind the question. You pay, you leave, and you drive home in a car with 84,000 miles on it that you've owned outright since the second year. This is what $4.3 million looks like on a Wednesday afternoon in a grocery store with bad lighting and a broken conveyor belt. It looks like nothing. That is not an accident. It started with a spreadsheet, not a revelation. No moment of clarity, no turning point you could frame and hang on a wall. Just a night in a one-bedroom apartment where the heat was inconsistent and the upstairs neighbor moved furniture at unreasonable hours, and you sat at a desk that was technically a folding table and tried to understand why the money always ran out before the month did. You were 26. Not broke in a dramatic sense. You had a job that paid adequately. No debt except a manageable student loan balance. The problem was quieter than debt. The problem was that the money arrived and disappeared at roughly equal speed and you had no clear account of where it went. It dissolved. Like it was never quite solid to begin with. So you built the spreadsheet. Not because you were disciplined by nature, but because the alternative was continuing to feel vaguely anxious every time you opened your banking app, and you were tired of that feeling. The spreadsheet showed you the problem immediately. Not overspending in any one category. Leakage. Small amounts, recurring, mostly automated, largely forgotten. Subscriptions enrolled during free trials and never cancelled. A storage unit holding things you hadn't touched in 14 months. A gym membership for a location 22 minutes from your apartment. Small numbers. Individually irrelevant. Together, they added up to $340 a month, leaving your account without producing anything you could name. You canceled them all in one evening. 40 minutes, total. The $340 didn't feel like money. It felt like recovered time, which is a strange way to think about a spreadsheet, but that's what it felt like. You took that number and automated a transfer to a separate account you made deliberately inconvenient to access. No debit card attached. Transfers took 2 business days. You named it Nothing Interesting. That was not the moment everything changed. Nothing changed that night. The apartment was still the same temperature. The upstairs neighbor still moved his furniture. You went to sleep at the same time you always did. But the direction had shifted by a fraction of a degree. And at the distances you were about to travel, a fraction of a degree becomes a completely different destination. The first real asset was not a business. It was a used car bought at a county auction for $4,200, cleaned up over 2 weekends, and sold for $7,100 through an online listing. You made $2,900 in roughly 3 weeks of intermittent work. Not because you had a plan to become a car dealer. Because you needed a way to test whether you could find undervalued things, apply modest effort, and capture the difference. The answer was yes. You ran that experiment 6 more times over 14 months. Not every transaction was clean. One car had a transmission problem you hadn't fully diagnosed and you sold it at cost. One sat for 11 weeks and you had to lower the price 3 times. But the overall ledger was positive. And more importantly, you understood something you couldn't have understood from reading about it. The gap between what something is worth and what someone paid for it isn't a secret. It's a gap that exists because most people don't have the patience to look. That's all. The arbitrage isn't technical. It's temperamental. You stopped flipping cars not because it stopped working, but because you found something with better mechanics. Storage unit auctions. Not glamorous. There is no version of this that sounds impressive at a dinner table. A facility manager sends notice, a delinquent tenant fails to respond, the unit goes to public auction under state law. Bidders show up. The unit is opened. You bid on what you can see from the doorway. You are not allowed inside before bidding. You are buying the contents based on a 2-minute assessment through a 6-foot opening. It rewards people who are good at reading patterns quickly and bad at impulsive risk. You turned out to be both. Your third unit contained the estate contents of someone who had clearly been a collector. Tools mostly. Organized by category, stored in original cases, brands you recognized from the research you'd started doing at night. You paid $650 for the unit. You spent 4 evenings cataloging the contents. You sold them over 6 weeks through 2 platforms and a local buyer who came with a truck. Total recovered, $11,400. You sat with that number on a Sunday evening with a cup of coffee going cold on the table and did the math on what it represented. Not in absolute terms. In terms of hours. Of labor. Of attention applied to a problem most people drove past on their way to somewhere else. You weren't getting rich from storage units. But you were training something. The part of you that could look at a situation and ask who actually owns the structure underneath it. Not the surface. The structure. At some point you stopped asking how to make more money and started asking what problem never goes away. The first answer you found was self-storage itself. Not buying contents at auction. Owning the facility. You spent 3 months studying the industry before you spent $1. You read operating statements from publicly available REIT filings. You found the break-even occupancy rates. You found the margin structure. You found that small, unglamorous facilities in secondary markets, the kind with chain-link fencing and manual gate codes and units that haven't been painted since the previous decade, frequently outperform more polished operations on a cost per square foot basis because their acquisition price reflects their appearance rather than their cash flow. You identified a facility in a mid-sized city that had been owned by the same family for 19 years. The patriarch had passed. The 2 adult children had lives in other states and no interest in managing it. The books were maintained with roughly the discipline of a moderate guess. Underneath the disorder, the numbers were real. Occupancy averaged 81% over the previous 4 years. The location was close to 2 apartment complexes and a college. Turnover was high, but so was demand. You bought it for $310,000, financed through a community bank willing to underwrite a borrower with no commercial real estate history but a clean personal balance sheet and a presentation you'd revised 8 times. The first full year of operation, net income after debt service was $44,000. You reinvested it entirely. The second year, after 2 rate adjustments and a small capital improvement to the security system that reduced your insurance premium by a meaningful amount, net income crossed $61,000. You did not celebrate. You used it to begin the conversation with the bank about the next acquisition. There is a particular kind of accountant. They have seen everything in the category of small business ownership. The disorganized, the overconfident, the people who confuse gross revenue with profit and are always surprised by the difference. After enough years, they stop being surprised by anything. They develop a very specific expression when you hand them a folder. Not quite interest and not quite skepticism. The expression of someone who has learned to reserve judgment until the numbers tell them what to think. Your accountant is named David. He has been doing this for 22 years. He has the expression. You hand him the folder at a meeting in his office. It is mid-morning. The folder contains a summary of everything you currently hold. He reads it without speaking for longer than most people would hold silence. Then he sets it down on his desk with a specific kind of deliberateness. You are aware, he says, that none of this is interesting. You tell him you are aware. Storage facilities. A coin laundromat. 2 small commercial parking structures. A vending route across 6 medical buildings. He pauses. Vending. You confirm vending. He looks at you for a moment with the expression of someone solving a problem they hadn't expected to be asked. The income is surprisingly consistent, he says. He means it the way a doctor means your blood work is unremarkable. You take it the same way. What David does not fully articulate, but what exists in the structure of everything in that folder, is a single organizing principle. Every asset serves a need that does not negotiate with economic conditions. People store their belongings when they move, when they downsize, when they inherit too much and have no room. That need does not pause during a downturn. People wash their clothes in a laundromat when they live in an apartment without in-unit machines. That need is load after load, week after week, completely indifferent to what the market did last quarter. People park their cars where they need to park them. Medical building employees and visitors need water and snacks from a vending machine in a break room hallway. None of this is exciting. That is precisely the qualification. At a professional event you attend for reasons related to a potential vendor relationship, there is a man who speaks with the specific energy of someone who believes the room is his audience. He references his portfolio in the language of scale and disruption. He uses the word ecosystem to describe what sounds like 3 loosely connected ventures. His jacket costs more than your monthly insurance on 2 facilities combined. You know this not because you price jackets, but because someone nearby identifies the brand in passing and you file it without meaning to. He asks what you do. You tell him you own a few storage units and some small commercial properties. A couple of other things. His eyes make the assessment before his face does. The car you mention parking. The jacket you're wearing. The descriptor a few storage units. He places you in a category. He smiles in a way that is polite and slightly minimal and turns towards someone else within 40 seconds. That dismissal costs him nothing. It returns you something. The moment someone decides you are not worth watching, you disappear from their attention entirely. That is not a small thing. You can look at the acquisition you're quietly running due diligence on without anyone in that room having any idea the conversation even existed. You can drive home and spend 90 minutes reviewing a lease structure on a potential parking facility without anyone else's read on you pressing on the decision. Maintaining the appearance of wealth costs more than the jacket. It creates an audience. Audiences have expectations. Expectations constrain behavior. You have no audience. You made that choice and you keep it with the same attention you apply to a property's cost basis. Your college friend Raina calls on a Tuesday evening. She has been building a pet grooming business for 3 years. 2 locations, steady clientele, a reputation she earned through the kind of slow, consistent work that produces real things rather than fast things. She needs $60,000 to secure equipment and cover the build-out deposit on a 3rd location that became available unexpectedly. The owner gave her a 2-week window. You could transfer $60,000 before the call ends. Not metaphorically. Literally, within the duration of the conversation, before she says goodbye, the money could be in her account. You do not do that. You tell her you'd like to come look at the numbers with her before she signs anything. She is slightly surprised but agrees. You spend a Saturday at her kitchen table, going through her operating statements. You find that her 2nd location is running a labor cost ratio that suggests she is overstaffed relative to the revenue it currently generates. Not badly. But enough that the margin is thinner than it should be going into a capital-intensive expansion. You ask about the lease terms on the new space. She pulls them out. There is a personal guarantee clause that would follow her for 7 years under the current draft. She didn't know that was negotiable. Most first-time tenants don't. You help her prepare a counteroffer on the lease terms. She gets the personal guarantee reduced to 3 years. You help her find a small business expansion grant through the city's economic development office that she qualifies for based on her employee count. She applies. 6 weeks later she receives $22,000. The remaining gap she funds through a structured line of credit at her community bank, using her existing locations as collateral, which she had been eligible for but hadn't pursued because the process looked complicated from the outside. She signs the lease on the 3rd location in week 9. She calls you the evening after the signing. There is something in her voice that comes from having solved the problem herself, with someone sitting beside her rather than someone solving it for her. That quality doesn't exist in transactions. It can't be purchased and handed to someone. It has to be earned from the inside. You don't tell her what you could have transferred. You will probably never tell her. This is not modesty. It is an understanding of what the story needed to be and who it needed to belong to. But you drive home and you sit in the driveway for a moment before going inside, and you sit with the fact that knowing you could remove a problem and choosing not to is not a neutral experience. It stays with you in a way that doesn't sort itself out neatly. The email arrives on a Thursday morning at 7:47 while you are in a hardware store, standing in the plumbing section, trying to determine whether a fitting you're holding is the correct diameter for a drain pipe under a utility sink at your laundromat. The property manager sent a photo. The photo wasn't entirely clear. You drove over because you were already out and it seemed faster than another round of messages. The notification is from David. Quarterly summary, final version. You almost return the phone to your pocket. These summaries are deliberately unexciting. That is one of their better qualities. But the number visible in the preview text is different enough from the last one that your hand stops. You set the fitting down on the shelf. You open the email. You read the total line twice. Not because the number is unclear. Because reading it once felt insufficient for what it contained. Total verified net worth, including all real property, operating business equity, liquid reserves and investment accounts, $4.31 million. You are standing in a hardware store. A man 3 feet away is comparing 2 types of pipe sealant with a focused expression of someone who has been in this aisle before and knows exactly what he's looking for. Somewhere toward the back of the store, a cart with a squeaky wheel is making its way through an adjacent section. The overhead lights have the particular quality of hardware store fluorescence, slightly blue, completely indifferent. Nobody in this building knows. The man comparing sealant doesn't know. The employee restocking a shelf at the end of the aisle doesn't know. The number exists inside a phone inside a hand belonging to a person holding a plumbing fitting, trying to remember what gauge the drain pipe was. You thought there would be more to the feeling. You had imagined this number carrying a certain weight when it finally arrived. A before and after you could feel the boundary between. Something in the room rearranging itself slightly. There is no rearrangement. There is the plumbing aisle and the squeaky cart and the blue-white light and David's email in 12-point font. You write back, thanks. Matches what I had. We'll review in full this weekend. Then you pick up the fitting again and take a photo of it to send to the property manager. You ask him to confirm the pipe diameter before you purchase. You walk to the front of the store. You wait in a short line. You pay for 2 other items you needed. In the car, you sit for a moment before starting the engine. Not because you are overwhelmed. Because you want to be accurate about what you're feeling before you move on. 11 years ago, you canceled $340 a month in subscriptions at a folding table in an apartment where the heat was inconsistent. You moved that $340 to an account with no debit card attached and a 2-day transfer delay. You did not feel rich that night. You did not feel like you were beginning something. You felt like you had addressed a problem that should have been addressed earlier, and that was all. What you feel now is not different in kind. The same feeling scaled. The quiet satisfaction of a system running the way you built it to run. No drama. No audience. The laundromat drain is still slow. The property manager is waiting on the fitting. David will have follow-up questions about Q4 projections before the week is done. You start the engine. Somewhere this week, you are going to watch someone spend money to project the appearance of having it. The lease on a car they can't own. The jacket purchased to communicate something to a room. The portfolio mentioned loudly because silence doesn't generate attention, and attention is what they're actually after. You understand that impulse better than you used to, which is maybe the strangest part of where you've ended up. The people who perform it and the people who've actually built it are almost never the same people. The performance requires constant upkeep. The other thing just compounds in the background of ordinary days, completely indifferent to who has noticed. The woman in the checkout line asked if you needed to put something back. You didn't. You won't. She doesn't know that, and neither does anyone else in that store, and the account will grow the same way it grew this morning. Without ceremony. Without an audience. You drive home and you think about the drain pipe.